Hello, my name is Kirsten Miller and I'm the lead artist for Reflect, Remembering Together Campbeltown. I'm working as part of a team which includes project facilitator Mira McAvney, workshopped artists Guy and Laurie Sylvan, and Sundial expert Alistair Hunter. I'd also like to say special thanks to everybody else who's helping us out in Campbeltown so far. That includes Learning and Access Assistant at Campbeltown Museum, Harry McPhail, the Live Argyll team, and the trustees of Lady Linda McCartney's Memorial Garden. Today we've invited along our sundial expert, Alistair Hunter, to introduce you to sundials, how they work, and how they can be used in a community context and their potential for inspiring imagination. So, what is Reflect? Reflect builds on the outcomes of the first phase of Remembering Together, a community consultation which was carried out in Argyll and Bute with the help of Lateral North. The majority of participants noted the importance of outdoors and natural environments in supporting their mental health during the pandemic. This project is funded by Scottish Government and delivered by Greenspace Scotland in partnership with Argyll and Bute Council and the Culture, Heritage and Arts Assembly, Argyll and Isles, better known as CHARTS. For Reflect Campbeltown, we will be co-creating a new sculptural sundial to be placed in Lady Linda McCartney Memorial Garden at Campbeltown Museum. We have chosen to create a community sundial due to the fact that Campbeltown Museum has always had one. Currently, the sundial sits in disrepair and disuse in the garden. We are currently engaging the local community, specifically primary schools, through environmental workshops which look at the passage of time and natural cycles. These have been hosted by Laurie and Gaia Sylvan. The key themes from these workshops will be taken by myself to the Kintyre Care Home Centre and Woodlands Residentials, where I will begin to co-design the installation with the residents, gathering reflections and memories to be incorporated into the final work. A bit about myself and my past work with Campbeltown Museum. In 2023, I worked with Mira McAvney and Karen McPhail to deliver The Wild Escape. This was a national project run by the Art Fund, and we joined hundreds of UK museums and schools to celebrate UK wildlife and creativity. We invited local primary schools to explore the wildlife of Kintyre and learn about the taxidermy collection at Campbeltown Museum, as well as create creative responses to these, which were displayed in a family fun day which took place on Earth Day 2023. This was part of a charts project working in partnership with Live Argyll. So, a bit about myself. I'm a practicing artist. I did my undergrad at Duncan Jordanstone's in Dundee, and I later did a master's in contemporary art practice at Edinburgh University. My art practice has a close connection to Argyll. Currently, I'm also working on a project looking at the Bonaw iron furnace. So that was quite a whirlwind introduction to our project, and I hope it gave you a brief overview of what we're planning to do. We will be hosting a talk in person at Campbeltown Museum, which will be happening on the 14th of May. More details about this will be released in time, so please do keep your eyes on Chart's social media and their websites for further information. Now I'm going to hand over to Alistair Hunter, who will give us an introduction to sundials and show us a couple of amazing examples of ones that have been made around the UK.
A sundial is quite a familiar thing, and it is a mystery. It tells the time by a shadow from the sun, which sounds simple, but over about the last 15 years, I have discovered so much more about sundials. Every sundial is based on mathematics and astronomy, but the possibilities for types, designs, and creative new ideas for sundials just go on and on. So I will help you discover sundials. We will make a beginning. I will show you designs and tell you 2 stories. This is a sundial in a garden. The pedestal is tall and beautifully carved in a red sandstone. It is quite an ornamental piece. The top stone follows the octagonal form of the pedestal, but from a photograph it is hard to tell whether this is original or a stone added later. Remember, over the centuries things often changed. The stones could be broken, the sundial might be moved to a different place in the garden, or to a different property altogether. We can see the edge of the dial, which has the green patination of a bronze plate, standing out in the weather over a long time. The gnomon is large, also in bronze, with a little decorative detail. This sundial has come from one of the top instrument makers in London, probably in the 1700s. It could be 250 years old. It would be expensive to buy, and the owner would be a wealthy person. Of course, if you have seen it, you will know this sundial is in the grounds of Inverary Castle. The gnomon points north to the stars in the sky, actually towards the pole star, which is the correct angle so that the shadow of the gnomon can tell the time on the dial. The dial plate is horizontal, so we call this a horizontal sundial. Here is a good example of a dial from that era, so you can see the detail. Again, the gnomon is massive, but a little plainer than the one at Inverary. The hours are marked in a circle round the outer edge of the dial. They are written in Roman numerals, rather like a clock. They run round from the left at 4 in the morning to 8 in the evening on the right. That is, from sunrise to sunset in high summer. In winter, the hours of daylight are much shorter. The hour of 12 is halfway round. This is when the sun is due south and the shadow of the gnomon is due north. Right round the outside, the divisions of time are 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and tiny intervals of 1 minute. The engraving on the dial is very precise indeed, all done by hand. In the centre of the dial is a 16-point compass rose, which sailors and people who go to sea will recognise, and then, between the compass rose and the chapter ring for the hours, there is another scale. The detail is hard to see in this photograph, but this is the time adjustment for setting time on a clock. It is the equation of time. The time on a sundial is simply where the shadow falls onto the dial, but the position where it falls is slightly different from day to day all through the year, adding up to a big difference of 15 minutes and then going down again. Astronomers long ago measured the difference and published the figures, which are engraved on this scale on the dial. So, before the time of the iPhone, the internet, the TV, the radio, the telegraph, you had to read the sundial to find the time, and then adjust the minutes to set your clock. Now, let's see a bit of fun. This little boat is a sundial. It is butting out to sea over the great ocean wave and is marked with the hours on the deck. What you could say is the boom of the ship makes a gnomon for the dial, and it casts the proper shadow. Of course, these grandchildren were delighted to see this little sundial boat, hearing what their granddad had to say. On the far side of the garden is a colourful mosaic created by local schoolchildren, which tells the story of the town. This is Cockenzie, with its sheltered harbour and its heritage of fishing, salt pans and coal on the East Lothian coast, very much like Campbeltown. The garden was created by the community at the time of the millennium in the year 2000. The area had been waste ground and the local people wanted it to become a restful place with grass and shrub borders. The sundial sculpture was done by a local stone carver and it stands at the centre of the garden. The John Muir coastal path runs just alongside. Another type of sundial that helps people to be involved is the one that is set out on the ground. This is quite popular in places like town parks and also in schools. The idea is that you are the gnomon and when you stand in the centre of the ring, your shadow points to the time. This is in Motherwell. It is part of a sensory garden, and it appeals to the sense of colour. Each of the hour posts is coloured differently, and there are colourful plants that come into flower every month of the year. Other parts of the garden appeal to senses of scent and smell and touch and texture. One of the most celebrated sundials in Britain has a special place at the Royal Observatory, Greenwich, in the garden of the astronomers. This wonderful sculpture of leaping dolphins above a surging ocean wave was created by Edwin Russell, who made a number of important sculptures for public places. The dolphins are holding the curved plate of a sundial, and the tiny gap between the dolphins' tails becomes the space between the shadows, where you can read the time. The hour lines are slightly curved for the equation of time, so you can actually set your clock by this sundial. And as the sundial is standing at Greenwich, it gives you the time at Greenwich, which is Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. The Dolphin Sundial was commissioned for Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee in 1977, and it was designed by Christopher Daniel. He was a master mariner and the head of navigation and time at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. Chris Daniel wrote this wonderful book. I found it in Morningside Public Library in Edinburgh, and it was my first introduction to the sundial's world. The picture on the front made me astonished and alarmed at the same time. I had no idea what this strange stone object could be, but I know now that each of the geometric carved hollows cut into the stone is in itself a miniature sundial. So the whole sundial is covered in mini dials, and each of them, even including the heart-shaped dial on the front, will read the time. The dial is in Herefordshire, and it goes right back to the time of Charles II in the 17th century, when people were fascinated by astronomy, science, and mathematics. Fortunately for me, there is an illustration in the book that is very easy to understand. The drawing is the frontispiece for a practical book on sundials published in Paris in 1760. It is quite clear what is happening. The gentlemen are looking up at the sundial so they can set their watch to the right time. The gnomon is fixed on the wall so that the spot of light will cross the vertical line at 12 noon. Noon is the time when the sun is due south. And this gave me an idea. I couldn't help my engineering mind trying to create a noon dial like the one on the wall, but of course it ended up more complicated than the drawing in the book, because I wanted to give the sundial its own place in a garden and make it freestanding. And I was so pleased when the National Trust for Scotland allowed me to put my new sundial on display for a year in their garden at Greenbank in Glasgow. That was in 2010. The handsome person in the photograph amuses me a little. He looks just like my father. This is the same design of sundial installed at a much later date in 2021. We are in North London, again in a garden, but this time in a small community garden. The local residents and community had been getting very frustrated with traffic congestion in their local streets, too much parking on pavements, buses unable to get through, and delivery lorries that couldn't get into the retail park. So, with the council's support, the community carved out a corner of peace at a road intersection, which they call a pocket park. They have introduced artworks, imaginative landscaping, and they wanted this sundial, mainly, I think, because of a small footprint and upright form. As we saw in the drawing from the book, This has a noon line down the centre, and I have added radiating hour lines. The sinuous figure of 8 is the equation of time, and the dotted lines across are for the dates of solstice and equinox. The numbers round the outside are the numbers of hours of daylight. I have borrowed the title, Follow Thy Fair Sun, from Thomas Campion, who was a poet and musician in the 16th century. We did the installation at the end of November when the sun is very low and the shadow spot is right at the top of the dial. The design is known as a vertical sundial with its vertical dial, and we can now move on to another one that is horizontal. The sundial at Inverary Castle is a horizontal one, of course, and an ancient one. This one is very modern. Stainless steel is quite a good material. The steel is polished to mirror finish and then etched chemically to make the dial. The lines have the mirror, while the etching leaves a matte finish where the shadows will fall. Then the gnomon is brass. It has a sculpture shape pointing to the pole star, and it has a support made like an old-fashioned clock hand. Precision engraving of the minutes in the ancient dial has been stripped away, leaving just the hours as a sculpture piece for the modern garden. You can tilt the dial, and if you set it to the polar angle, the gnomon and the dial are the same, on a slope, in line with the pole star. The hour lines go parallel to each other, running from morning to afternoon. When the sun rises in the east, the shadows fall onto the dial to the west, on the left. The Roman numerals alternate down and up, helping to space them out, and they start at 7 in the morning. The hours run through to 12 at midday, which is noon, and go on to 5. 6 in the evening will be beyond the edge of the dial. The curved lines give us the solstice in winter and summer, and the horizontal line is the equinox in spring and autumn. The equation of time is laid out as a scale of minutes at the bottom, and the small correction for longitude is shown as well. This dial lives in the ancient city of Chichester in West Sussex, on the south coast of England. At the top, you can see the owner's initials and the date 2022. Now, this is an armillary sphere. The one thing that is still familiar is the polar pointing gnomon, which is the rod through the middle with an arrow at its end. The rod casts a shadow onto the inside of the broad equator band, which has equal cut-out spaces for the hours. The whole idea is that this is like the globe of the Earth, with the sun passing across the sky. Ancient astronomers had another idea, that the sky was actually a great spherical dome above, with the sun, the planets and the stars tracing their daily and annual paths across its surface. The skeleton sphere is called armillary because armilla is the Roman word for a ring or a bracelet which they wore on their arm. The two large rings on the dial, above and below the equator, are the Tropic of Cancer, the turning point of the sun in summer, and the Tropic of Capricorn, where the sun turns in winter. The Arctic and Antarctic circles are there as well. A sundial in this form, the armillary sphere, is quite popular, and a number of companies make them. You can let your imagination run with sundials. You can strip the armillary sphere down to the very basic, leaving only the ring for the meridian, which is the vertical ring lined up exactly north-south, and the equator ring. Here, instead of a gnomon rod, an ordinary horizontal sundial is mounted inside. The gnomon borrows a motif from wildlife with a little bird. Even more amazing, you can tip the little bird forward if he goes down to Spain, and you can tip him back if he goes up to Norway. That is why there are adjustment screw holes at the bottom of the broad meridian ring to set the latitude, north or south, for the sundial. I was so pleased about this one. First, a member of the RSPB recognised my little bird as a great tit, which is what I was hoping for. And second, a friend of mine in France wanted a sundial, so this little bird flew away to live in a garden in Paris. You can borrow the shapes of flowers in the garden and in the fields as well, if you want to. The sunflowers in fields will turn to face the sun, and they have their own distinctive shape. Here, the shape is pierced through the gnomon and casts its shadow onto the crescent dial. The single sunflower petals mark the hours, which we can see at 3 in the afternoon, then at 4 and 5, then 6 in the evening, and you can just see 7, which is just after 6. Below, and not so well shown in this picture, the gnomon will even catch a shadow for the solstice and equinox. Now, I must start my first sundial story. This stone column looks rather like a clock tower. It stands in the Inverleith Park on the north side of Edinburgh city centre, and in 2017 it was in poor condition. Actually, it is a sundial with 4 dials, one on each of the north, south, east and west faces, carved by sculptor Robert Thompson. At the International Exhibition of Electricity, Engineering, General Inventions and Industries, held in 1890 in Edinburgh at Meggetland, it was Exhibit 299D. Thomas Edison, the American inventor, pioneer of electricity and developer of the light bulb, was vice president of the exhibition. It attracted over 3 million visitors. Unfortunately, the exhibition made a loss. Councillor Joseph Kinloch Anderson was vice chair of the exhibition and a guarantor. Probably as a gesture of goodwill to Robert Thompson, he purchased his sundial and presented it to the City of Edinburgh for the newly opened Inverleith Public Park. The present-day directors of the company of Kinloch Anderson, Kilt Makers, realised in 2017 that restoring their historic sundial would be an excellent centrepiece for company celebrations 1 year later. The company was founded in 1868, and the year 2018 would be their 150th anniversary. The sundial was moved to workshops in Edinburgh and cleaned. The inscription on the base, presented by Councillor Kinloch Anderson 1890, is visible. The octagonal dials are marble inserts, and they now have their hour lines and numerals restored. The south dial reads I number none but sunny hours, while the north dial is more sombre, saying, so passes life, alas, how swift. A new finial was carved for the top, and new gnomons in gilded brass were fitted to the dials. A celebration garden party was held by the company at Inverleith Park in June 2018. An exclusive sundial tartan had been designed, and a length of the new tartan cloth was used for the unveiling. The Lord Provost of Edinburgh attended and the local pipe band played. The sundial glowed after its restoration and the gnomons were shining. The weather was raining. My second story is about a person and about a sundial. The beautiful portrait painting of the young girl on the right wearing a gold dress is Frances Teresa Stuart. We will come to the left-hand picture later. She had royal connections through her grandfather, Walter Stuart of Renfrewshire, who was a cousin of James VI. The two young men were educated together at Stirling Castle. She was born in 1647 in France and became maid of honour to the Queen at court in London. The king was Charles II. He chased young girls all round the palace and into the bedroom if he could, but Frances Stuart declined. She married the Duke of Richmond privately, and the king was displeased. He banished the Duke to Denmark as ambassador, where he fell off a ship and drowned in the sea. Married at 20, widowed at 25, Frances was now on her own. She was reconciled with the king and became Duchess of Richmond and Lennox. In her youth she was thought of as silly, but she proved to be wise and well advised and had good friends. She successfully managed her duke's estates and increased her wealth. She was admired at court and was even the original model for Britannia on coins. In 1702, she attended the coronation of Queen Anne, and later that year, 55 years old, she died. In her will, she stated her wishes. First, that her wax effigy would be placed in the Duke of Richmond's vault in the Henry VII's chapel at Westminster Abbey. The photograph shows her effigy dressed in her coronation robes and now in the Abbey's museum today. Second, her cousins in Scotland should inherit her wealth. They were to use the money to buy property in Scotland, in particular so that the young master of the family would grow up in the style she had always known. Her executors bought an estate at Erskine, near Paisley, in 1703, and the estate of Lethington, near Haddington, in East Lothian. She said they should rename a property in her name with love from the Duchess of Lennox. So Lethington became Lennox Love. This sundial is in the garden of Lennox Love today. To be brief, it is a puzzle. Quite clearly, it is a statue of Frances Stuart wearing court dress of the reign of Charles II, with puffy sleeves, ribbons in her hair, and holding up the train of her dress as she would, unless she was in the presence of the king. But her hairpiece has been built up to hold the weight of the sundial, and the sundial itself is dated 1679, which is clearly carved and is recorded as coming from North Bar, neighbour to the estate at Erskine. This is before 1703. What seems to have happened is that maybe in the 1800s, a descendant of the family had acquired the North Bar sundial and commissioned a statue in the memory of their ancestral benefactor. Oddly, they decided she should be the new pedestal for the sundial. Frances Teresa Stuart is well remembered for her beauty, wisdom, and wealth as a member of the court of Charles II. Remarkably, her image appears in portrait paintings, has been stamped onto coins of the realm, remains as an effigy in wax, and still survives as a statue for a sundial. Next time, I will talk more about sundials in Scotland and explain our unique sundial heritage. I can tell you about historic sundial restorations, and I will describe exciting new sundials in the community.